welcome to Torch Hours. Do you ever get nostalgic when you start thinking back on the hikes and travels that you've done and want to do them all over again? That is exactly how I felt reviewing day 2 of the West Coast Trail. On day 2, we set out from Tsocowis and we continued southbound. We saw the derelict donkey engine. There's some great lookouts all along here. When we got to Klinawa River, we actually didn't have to take the cable car across because there was a sandbar that had filled in this whole area and we were able just to walk straight across. So we walked straight across and continued on our way to Tsusiat Falls, which was right here. We had a great view actually all along this area. There's quite a wonderful ladder system getting down to this camp. That's lots of fun. And that was a very short day for us. We went from basically kilometer almost 17 to kilometer 20, just past 25. Our day with a pretty good ladder system that led us to a bridge that went over Tsocowis Creek. Not long after we started our hike, we came to our first lookout over Valencia Bluffs. Soon after the lookout, we quite literally came to the end of the road. In the previous episode, I mentioned that at some point they tried to build a road from Banfield along the West Coast Trail. The effort didn't get very far and the machinery was abandoned at this point. One of the hazards that you may have heard of are the boardwalks, and though we tested the boardwalks and did our best to be cautious, 3 out of the 5 of us did manage to fall through a few planks, and I was one of them. One of the other hikers took this lovely shot of me while I am struggling on my hands and knees trying to get out of the boardwalk. After taking a trail that leads you along the edge of the bluffs, we descended to a beach called Anchor on the Rocks. This was left by another shipwreck called Woodside in 1888. The next 2.5 kilometers are along the beach. Like the previous day, this is an opportunity for whale watching, to see bald eagles and sea lions. one section along this beach route is only accessible at low tides, but this wasn't a problem for us because we had planned our route accordingly. We found a sea lion carcass, which I did not take any photos of, and this interesting creature from the deep. When we reached Klanawa River and campsite, we crossed paths with the Guardians once again. They were finishing repairs on an outhouse door. They told us that we could avoid taking the cable car and walk along the sandbar, which was safe at that time. Klanawa looked like a beautiful campsite, and if I were to do the hike again, I think that I would try staying there one of the nights. The next 2.5 kilometers were by forest and ended with a very serious ladder descent down to Tsusiat Falls campground. There was a bit of a traffic jam at the ladder system when we arrived, and we had to wait for a tour group to go up. Once we got to the campsite, we were the only ones there for a good hour or so, even longer. It was a little bit foggy, but we set up camp and soon the sun came out and we just got to spend the afternoon exploring the beach, swimming in the waterfalls, sunbathing, and whale watching. Tsusiat Falls is probably one of the most popular campgrounds on the trail because of the falls. It is also the first campsite after Cribbs Creek when you're going northbound, and that's a good 17 kilometers south of Tsusiat Falls. So unless you take a stop at Nitnat Narrows for the night, this is your first destination, and likewise your last destination before getting to Cribbs Creek the next day. This is where you start to meet a lot of campers and hear a lot of stories along the way of their journeys or how they got to the trail. This is where we heard the tale of Shoeless Joe. That's our nickname for the camper. This is a story of a young man who entered the trail at Nitnat Narrows and headed southbound about 5 or 6 kilometers and then found a beautiful sunny beach and decided to take a nap. He awoke to the water lapping at his feet, his boots had been washed away by the ocean, and his stuff around him was floating and soaking wet. He gathered his belongings and walked barefoot back to the crab shack at Nitnat Narrows the same day. He is so fortunate because that is probably one of the nicest maintained and smoothest sections on this trail. He's also lucky because they do sell a few things at the crab shack other than food, and they happen to have a pair of hiking boots in his size. At some point, a group of northbound hikers came through the crab shack and he decided to follow them to Tsusiat Falls and got in around 8 or so that night and set up camp next to us. So that's how we learned that story. The lesson here is pay attention to your orientation, get to understanding tides if you're not familiar with them, and maybe don't fall asleep next to the ocean when the tide is out. The famous Tsusiat Falls This is what it looks like in mid-August. It's a bit foggy today. The ocean's just on the other side of this hill. We ended our evening watching whales as the sun set into beautiful shades of pinks, purples, and oranges.